So hello and welcome back to Exploring Azeroth with Beryl and friends. No Onyx today, because although Vashj'ir is an area that I love, it also seems to be one of the glitchier areas in WoW. And poor Onyx is stuck on a quest that glitched out, so she couldn't show you all of the Horde areas, but suffice it to say they're all pretty much the same. Beryl, who has completed the zone, is going to lead us on our tour, and we started there back at the Briny Cutter, which is where you begin. Vashj'ir is kind of cool. It's a very linear quest line that leads you through all of the zones. And it's kind of sad. Like I said, Vashj'ir is one of my more favorite zones. I forget about it for long stretches at a time because it's just so disconnected. WoW did this big experiment in an underwater zone, and people kind of hated it, which is too bad because I said it to somebody in my Discord recently. Vashj'ir is just a vibe. It's such a interesting zone. It's such an aesthetic zone. It's very pretty, but it's hard to get to if you don't know where to go, and therefore I feel like a lot of people just skip it. I've got a lot of nostalgia for it because it was my first Cataclysm zone. I've got some huge memories of logging in the very first day in Cataclysm and just seeing all of this. It was kind of awesome. Also, there's a lot of interesting creatures in the zone, like the one that you just saw, the gill goblin, gilly goblins. They are kind of all over, at least in Kelpthar Forest, and they're nasty little creatures, but they're also kind of cool. They're an aquatic goblin. Most of them don't seem to be quite as intelligent as our land-dwelling goblins, but from what I've read on Wowpedia, some of them are quite intelligent, actually. And there's actually a toy that is sold by the Time Walkers when time walking is up that will turn you into one. So I did not know that before I was digging around and looking into things, and now that I know that, I might have to spend some of my time walking badges just so I can be a gill goblin. They're kind of cool. But yeah, after you do your quests on the Briny Cutter, you'll be sent on to Smuggler's Scar. There's a whole bunch of little questing hubs like this all through the zone, and like I said, it's a really linear zone, so you get sent from one to the other, and as soon as you're done questing in them, most of the time there's not much left. You know, there'll be a little campfire, sometimes there'll still be an innkeeper, and of course the seahorse, which serves as your flight master. But don't let that stop you from coming back, because this is a really good zone to just kind of chill in. It's really pretty, it's very big, and it culminates in a dungeon that we're going to run with Onyx next week, which is the Throne of Tides, which is a very cool dungeon, which is another thing I always forget about this area. But right now, we're actually going to switch over to Lantra, who is going to show you how to get a unique mount that you can only get here in Vashj'ir. It's a really fast underwater mount. It's the Abyssal Seahorse, and it is not an account-wide mount. So each one of your characters actually has to come and get it. You talk to the Tauren back there. She gives you a fish that you put out on a lure. The seahorse comes by, and then you have to tame it. It's actually, honestly, it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's just a number mashing game, but it's a unique way to get a mount, and I appreciate that they added it. Plus, it's a really quick tour of Kelpthar Forest, as long as the seahorse doesn't throw you off. Which, I mean, it shouldn't. It's not really that hard of a quest, but it does end up with you getting a seahorse mount. I think they might have added a different seahorse mount in later expansions, but it's not this pretty bluey purple one. And I don't think that the other ones that they added go quite as fast as that one. So, if you're looking for Lord of the Rains or any of the other mount achievements and you don't already have this, head down to Vashj'ir and just do at least the questing up until that point. It takes maybe 15-20 minutes if you're going really, really fast to get to this quest, and then you are golden, and in like 2.5 minutes, you have a brand new mount. So there we go. Lantra has now gotten the mount, and like I said, I don't know if they're going to be changing it in the War Within, but if they're not, you can only get this account per character. So a different one of my alts that hasn't done this would not actually be able to ride the seahorse, even though I've collected it many, many times. But back to Beryl and our tour of the Kelpthar Forest. She's going to head over to, I can't even say his name because, my goodness, it's almost as bad as Murglish. But that is the home of the Gill Goblins, or at least that bunch of them. And then just directly across from that is the Skeletal Reef, which is kind of a cool area, and it's where you do some quests for Bud, as is kind of evident by the name. This reef, everything on it is skeletal, from the coral to the fish, which I appreciate the attention to detail. I mean, they're a very unique fish model, and I don't know if they're in any other spots in the game, but they make me happy. But yeah, you do a bunch of quests over here. You are trying to get Gnaws, which is definitely a play on Jaws, and in the end you end up being bait for it as you help Bud, our adventurer friend from almost every expansion, try to get the treasure that Gnaws is guarding. Bud being Bud, things don't go all that well for him, but it's kind of a fun little quest, and one I highly recommend. Just past old Bud's Dig and the Skeletal Reef is a area that is filled with Naga and all sorts of other things, but before we get there, we're going to stop and see what Gnaws has wrought. I mean, WoW's version of Jaws is eaten orcas, which I don't think actually happens in real life. I think it's usually the orcas that are eating the great whites, but, you know, this is WoW, and WoW can do what WoW wants to do. So right up ahead, just past Deep Mist Grotto, which is another questing hub, is this Naga area. There is, if you are questing through here for the first time and at level, there is a Naga rare up on the shelf that gives a pretty good necklace that you might want to get if you're not doing other dungeon stuff. But other than that, you're just kind of rescuing some more of the Alliance or Horde captives that the Naga have taken. And once you're done with that, it is time to move on to the next questing area, past the Lightless Reaches, and into, I think it is the Deep Mist Grotto, or is the Silvertide Trench? Good question. It's the Damplight Chamber. And this is a very short questing zone, but you get to fend off a giant Naga attack. And then in a little bit of vindictiveness, you get a spear, and you are told to spear 20 of the fleeing Naga as they leave. And then that leads you on to the next questing zone. It's kind of fun. After you spear all of the fleeing Naga, you end up being told to then drag them out of the cave that is your next questing hub. Because, you don't want any Naga stinking up the place. Now, the second zone here that we're heading into in Vashj'ir, the Shimmering Expanse, is the largest, well, I guess it's technically the second largest of the questing zones. Kelpthar Forest is the smallest. This one is really cool and kind of unique because it houses one of two ancients that are down here. I'm not really sure if they're technically considered ancients or if they're considered gods. They're kind of referred to both different ways. But the first one that you commune with is, let's see if I can actually say its name correctly, Nespera. And that is the great big thing that you see right up there with the big sea serpent in front of it. And I saw on Wowipedia that they refer to it as a turtle-like being, but that don't look like any turtle I've ever seen. Few too many tentacles to really be a turtle. But your next questing hub is the Silvertide Hollow, and that is either Horde or Alliance. It's a neutral questing hub, and so it's a little bit bigger. Got a couple of beds. The inn is a little bit fancier. But mostly what you're going to be doing here, other than getting food and stuff, is going ahead and questing inside of Nespera. You have to figure out a way to communicate with her, and so you do a bunch of quests in here. It's also where you find either the Horde or Alliance soldiers that were captured by the Naga. They drug them in here because they need slaves to mine the pearls that are inside of Nespera. So you have a whole big long quest chain where you help commune with Nespera, you help lance the infection, as she calls it, which is the Naga that are infesting her. Also, if you kill any of these fluid blobs, they give you a buff to all of your stats for, I think, 10 minutes each time you kill one. So that's kind of handy. After you meet up with your Alliance or Horde counterparts inside of Nespera, you're told to rescue Horde and Alliance slaves, save them from the pearl mines. And then you're going to kill a bunch of Naga and head up to the heart chamber of Nespera to lance a bunch of different infections in her. And it's kind of fun, honestly. I had a lot of fun questing through here with Beryl because as a rogue, she can pickpocket. And I have the glyph that makes it so every time you pickpocket, you become whoever you pickpocket. So I had a lot of fun slithering around in here as a Naga. It was kind of fun. I kind of wish you could pickpocket other players, either of your faction or of the opposite faction, just so that I could walk around as a big old hulking, mimic of a player. It's not fair that mages get to be the only ones to mirror somebody else. But that's an argument for another day. Anyway, you can see all of the Nespera pearls, and you can also see right over here, at least for the Alliance, I did pass by the Horde area, is the Alliance captives that you help out. And the culmination of the Nespera storyline is you go up, you lance her infection up in her heart chamber, which, I'm not going to lie, I spent a long time looking for the passage to this, so if you're doing this quest chain, pay attention about right here, and you can see the stairway up to the heart chamber. was a little bit confusing. Maybe I'm just dumb. I could just be dumb. It's entirely possible. But you run up here, you finish off your quests, and then you can commune with Nespera, who thanks you very much for all of your help and says that she will be doing pretty good from here on out. Now, when you're actually doing the quests, this whole chamber is just full of enemies. And I think it was an elite that was up here. Probably a hard fight at level, but if you're over leveled and just coming here for the vibes, it's a fairly easy quest. Also, some of the transmog from the questing gear that you get here is not too bad looking. I had forgotten just how good some of it was, and now I might have to go and get the rest of the questing gear sets because, heck, why not? But that's about it for Nespera. Thankfully, we're able to save her. There is one other ancient that you will see in a little while, and his story's a little bit sadder. I do like the fact that the Earthcaller stays here, communing with Nespera, even after your questing is done. Alright, we are going to move on. I do also really... I always have to give shout outs to the art team in WoW. And even down here in a zone where almost nobody goes anymore, it's gorgeous. Also, if you're into Night Elf lore, the city that Lady Vash lived in during the Sundering is right here in front of you. And there is an awesome quest chain that you do here in the Shimmering Keldor Grotto that has you actually living as a battle maiden of the Naga. But you can see here that Lady Vash, Lady Vashj'ir, Queen Azara, they were all down here. In fact, there are statues to Queen Azara, Queen Azara's mother, and a priestess and a ranger, because this is where the Sundering actually took place. I kind of wonder if this would actually match up with the animatic from BFA. Probably not, but it's a gorgeous city. And this is a quest chain. It was a little bit buggy on some of the characters that I've taken through here, but when it's not buggy, this is an awesome quest chain. You go through, I think, 6 or 7 different phases as one of the Naga warriors from Lady Vashj'ir. And you're fighting the Kelvedar, which you'll see later in BFA and Legion. So it's a very cool story, and if you've never done it, I suggest that you come through and do it, because it's a lot of fun. Plus, just from a WoW lore standpoint, it's kind of neat to swim around down here and just see all the ruined Night Elf architecture. Or I guess technically they were High Elves back then. But here we are in the ruins of Vashj'ir. Now, to start the Lady Vash storyline, you will find an artifact right here where Beryl is. And that starts it all off. You also have quests for either the Alliance or the Horde, just sort of securing your position, getting some food, doing some scouting, and then moving on to our next area. Where I'm going right now is the Alliance base. It's deserted because everyone's moved on, but that's okay. It gives you yet another spiffy little camping site. And we move on yet again. It's kind of weird to think that this final section, the Abyssal Reaches, is actually the largest section of Vashj'ir because it's the one that feels the most empty. And from what I understand, that's because there was so much backlash to Vashj'ir as an underwater zone that they actually did not finish it. They kind of abandoned this area and poured all of their efforts into Mount Hyjal and the Molten Front. There was actually a raid that was supposed to be down here, but it ended up getting scrapped, which I think is too bad. There's a quest chain, and I was kind of mad, and I tried to get back on board the Vern over there, the submarine. And if I would have realized that I wasn't going to be able to get back on it, I would have gotten footage of the inside of it, because the inside of this submarine is awesome. From what I read, there was actually supposed to be more questing with the submarine, and again, it got scrapped, which just makes me sad, because they put a lot of detail into it, and I'm really definitely sad that I couldn't get back inside, just to show you. But I'm going to say what I have said 10,000 times, just do the quest line. I didn't have too much trouble, and I think even with Onyx, I'll be able to get her to finish this entire zone. Just right now, she's kind of on a semi-stuck portion. One of the quest givers has disappeared, and I'll just have to figure out where on earth they've gone. But yeah, the Abyssal Depths is, I think, of the 3 zones, both the most bleak and in some ways the prettiest. Also, if you are doing the Hive Mind Mount Mystery Quest, one of the things that you need for the Hive Mind Mount is actually down here. So maybe Vashj'ir was not completely forgotten, just kind of forgotten. Also, I'm not sure what was going on there. Every time I mounted, I would swim a little bit and get dismounted. I think it might have had something to do with the fact that I was right on top of the Horde cave for the Abyssal Depth area. I spent far too much time being utterly entranced by the glowing jellyfish. I think that's why I really like the Abyssal Depths, is there's so much like glowing stuff. There's also a hilarious quest, at least on the Alliance side down here, where you find a dwarf and his brother has been eaten by the giant moray eels that are swimming around down here. And he and his brother evidently have some sort of an ailment where they can't actually dive. So he's got himself weighed down with a giant seashell. He gives you a really cool looking little hat that I wish I could mog. It's got a little glowing lure on it, and he has you lure a bunch of the little glowfish. It's kind of a... It's an optional quest, but If you're Alliance anyway, I'd suggest you do it. It's a lot of fun. Also, you have a quest where you have to go out and kill a bunch of the sea turtles and the other wildlife and squeeze some biofuel for the submarine out of them, which is a little ridiculous. But yeah, there's the dwarf. You can see all you get to see of him is his legs. He's very worried about his brother, but he also wants to collect these fish for his comrades to eat. They're very silly. You just use your lure hat and they just swim up to you and it auto completes. It's kind of hilarious. Now, if you remember, I was talking about the hive mind mount and the fact that there is a vendor who is down here. The vendor is a giant serpent, and it's extremely pretty, and I wish that it was a mount or a pet. There's a pet that looks kind of similar to it in Silithus that I'm gonna have to go take my hunter and get. It's not exactly the same, but it's close enough, I guess. But yeah, evidently if you are on the hive mind quest chain, this right here is a secret vendor that you have to visit for that quest chain. I just personally think it's also a very, very pretty creature. Can you imagine that as a mount? I think I would like that better than the hive mind mount, personally. So the last big area that we're going to head to is the last ancient. After, I think we're going to free Willy first, which I thought was really funny. I can't remember when I was doing the filming of this whether or not I went to see Will E first or second, but this is the second ancient. This is Logorak. And Logorak, unlike Nespera, is in really bad shape. You also are going to be trying to commune with him, but he's been infested by the Twilight's Hammer cult, and they're slowly killing him. Unfortunately, at the end of the quest chain, he does die, which is kind of sad. If you are doing the quest chain, there are 3 Twilight's Hammer ogres that you have to kill before you can go inside and finish the quest chain. They are not inside the shell. Do not go into the shell tubes. They're actually under the shell. So right there is one of the entrances to Logorak. But if you swim down, there's actually an area underneath called the undershell, and that's where the ogres are. Just in case you're on that quest chain and you don't want to swim around endlessly and then run around inside of Logorak, wondering where on earth you're supposed to be finding these things that you're supposed to kill, they're underneath them. So now you know. And now you're one step ahead of where I was when I was on that quest chain. But after you kill them, you go ahead, you turn that quest in, and then you go inside. Unfortunately, there's no actual loot, per se, inside of here. So you can't go in here and just, make a bunch of money from all these elites. But this is actually the culmination of this questing zone. And if you think it ends abruptly, you're not wrong. This is where it really shows that they kind of just abandoned this zone. There was more planned, probably with Twilight's Hammer, possibly introducing a little bit more of the whole Neptulon thing, which probably would have made the dungeon make more sense, because I don't know that I had ever heard of Neptulon before. But Yeah, unfortunately was scrapped. Don't let that stop you from doing the Throne of Tides, though. It's a very cool dungeon. But the culmination of the entire quest zone ends with you taking control of one of those bound torrents, going on a killing spree, and then facing off against that dude there. Once you kill him, I think what you end up with is a ring. And that's it. It doesn't even give you a breadcrumb directing you to the dungeon, although the dungeon isn't far below. You can kind of see it. Also, when I was on Wowipedia, I saw that according to Wowipedia, there are 2 dungeons in Vashj'ir. I think Wowipedia might have gotten their facts wrong, or maybe there were 2 5-man dungeons planned. If there's another dungeon in Vashj'ir, drop it in the comments below, because I'm actually really curious. I only saw just the one, but if there's another one, dang it, I want to go do it. Now, don't think that we are completely done here, because there is one more spot. If you know me, you know I'm always looking for housing, since Blizzard has not seen fit to give us player housing yet. So I'm always on the lookout for housing. I've pretty much found at least one house in every zone so far. And I was really despairing that I was not going to find anything in Vashj'ir that I could even count as a house. Other than, of course, you know, the inns. But fear not, I found something better than a house. Before I show you that, we're going to go over here and take a look at Willy. He is a giant whale shark that is being held captive by a bunch of tentacled horrors. Because of course he is. Poor Willy. He's an optional quest you can do. You don't actually have to go save Willy, but it just makes me kind of smile. It's another one of Blizzard's pop culture references, you know, Free Willy. And, yeah. But now, like I said, there's one more spot after we check out these Naga, and that is actually on the surface of the water. So we're going to have a nice long swim up to the surface, and I will see you in a minute. Alright, once we break to the surface of the water, it's time to get out a mount that actually flies. And as you can see, it's kind of funny, because until you actually surface, there is no way other than the portal to get to Vashj'ir. But if you surface, and as you're questing, you will be sent to the surface, but you won't actually be sent to the land flight master. You'll just be sent to this group of ships, and the ships is the closest thing that I have found in Vashj'ir to an actual house. Unfortunately for the Horde, it, as usual, the Horde got shortchanged on this. But if you are an Alliance player, all 3 of these ships are fully outfitted with a below decks cabin on each of them. We'll just take a quick look at one of them, but all 3 are the same. And so if you wanted to be a pirate and you needed your own little secret base, well, you've got 3 here. You could have an entire fleet. It's kind of awesome. So not quite a house, but not quite not a house. More of a house than we got with the garrisons, so there is that. Also, Horde players, I'm pretty sure that only one of these ships will mark you for PvP, so you could always just take over one of the ships and just have to kill a bunch of NPCs every time they respawn. But, you know, if you wanted to live out your sea captain dreams, you can still do it. Now, the land flight point is that little chain of islands right up ahead. So, I'm going to switch mounts, and we are going to head to this little deserted island out in the middle of nowhere. And there's a Horde flight point here, and there is also an Alliance flight point here, and that actually connects you to the Eastern Kingdoms. Ironically enough, it's actually above the Kelpthar forest where this all began. That kind of makes me laugh. The Horde is at the eastern end of the island. Right over there, you've got a Horde Flight Master and a Horde Seahorse. And at the western end of the sandy beach is the Alliance Flight Master and Seahorse, which then connects you to all of the Eastern Kingdom's flight points. You can actually get to the Eastern Kingdoms just by flying. You have to go through a decent-sized fatigue zone, but not too bad. I also wanted to check out and make sure that there was nothing else on this island. There was no secrets that I found. If you know of any, please drop them in the comments down below, because I would be curious. Now, when you actually fly all the way, you can end up in either Tirisfal Glades, which is kind of funny because you don't actually end up in Tirisfal Glades, but from what I read on Wikipedia, if you die in certain spots in Vashj'ir, you will actually respawn at a spirit healer in either Tirisfal Glades or Cosmodon. So that was a fun little fact, because they were technically, in a few spots in Vashj'ir, the closest graveyards to you. And as you fly towards the shoreline, it will briefly tell you that you are in Tirisfal Glades, but you will see where Beryl actually ends up is the ruins of Gilneas. I flew on another character through a slightly skinnier section of the fatigue zone and ended up just outside of Ironforge, so just depending on where you aim is where you'll end up. But as long as you have fast flying speed, you're not going to actually die of fatigue out here. So that's about it. Once Beryl lands, our next thing that we're going to do next week, since the Cataclysm zones are a much shorter bunch of zones, since we already did 3 of them, doing the Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor, next week we are going to let Onyx take us through the Throne of Tides. I'm going to spend some time researching and finding out all I can about that dungeon. But yeah, thank you for joining me. I hope that you enjoyed this. Hit the thumbs up button if you don't mind. Subscribe if you want to see me run through a dungeon. And next week, we'll learn a little bit about the Throne of Tides. But until then, from me, and Beryl, and Lantra, and even Onyx, who wasn't here this week, thanks for watching. Say goodbye, Beryl.